Hello students, in part 1 we started Python functions and we discussed about some types of argument. In continuation with that, I am continue with next category of arguments. The next category is default argument. After the keyword argument we have discussed. So sometimes when we pass any value to a function, we may forget to pass all the parameters. In that case, if we have given the default value to the variable, that default value would be considered. For example, in this example, name age 35. Name is not given any value, age is given value 35. So this is called default value for age. So that means if we don't pass the second parameter age value, that would be by default taken as 35. Okay. I am taking two function call example here. One is using keyword argument where age and name both are mentioned along with the values and the keywords. But in this example, only name is mentioned and age is not mentioned. So for this particular function call, the default value of age is taken. Okay. And the supplied value is also taken. But if we don't pass, it will not generate error, but will consider the default value. Okay. For example, if I execute one more example here, suppose we are writing function for finding sum of two variables. So a comma b, if I define this function and for b I am giving a default value 9. Okay, for b default value is 9 and we have to return a plus b. Okay, now if I call this function sum with only one value, so it is giving 13 because 9 default value is taken and 4 we have passed. And we can also pass both the values as well. In that case, only the passed value would be treated for finding the sum. Okay. This is how we can make use of default arguments. Now, variable length argument. Variable length argument are the arguments which are not fixed. Like sometimes we may call the function with one value or even zero value depending upon our problem. So Python allows us with help of this asterisk sign and variable name, which is interpreted as container for tuple, and this tuple will contain all the extra parameters which are passed at the time of calling. In this particular example, argument 1 is mandatory. Like whenever we call this function, it is mandatory. Even if we can delete this, in that case it will totally become optional or n number of argument could be passed. So in this case, if argument 1 is passed and along with that some more parameters are passed, so extra parameters would be stored in this star by tuple. This variable name could be anything, but whatever extra parameters are being passed, they are stored in the tuple format. So if I print this argument 1, it has to be printed first, mandatory argument, and then if remaining argument are passed as an optional parameter, that could be printed using this for loop. For var in var tuple, we are printing each value of var. Okay, so if I call this function with only one value, so that one value is being given to argument 1 and we can print using this print arg1. Otherwise, if we are calling this function with three values, where actually argument 1 is mandatory and rest are optional. So optional values are two here, 60 and 50. So this 60 and 50 is stored in this var tuple, and that var tuple could be accessed using this for loop in order to display all the values. Let me do one more demo example on this variable length argument. For example, the same function here at place of b9, if I write star b. Okay, let me name this function as display. So display star b, that means we can display one value or we can display more than one value. So in that case, either we'll send only one, so simply say print a, and for remaining values, for I in b, this particular b tuple where all the extra values are stored, so we have to print I. Okay, now if I call this function display for only one value, then it is printing that one value. But if I call this function for multiple values, that is optional. so it will display all the values. So these rest of the values are being stored as a tuple. Okay, so suppose we want to print this tuple before accessing individual element. To know the status, print B. Okay, same code. Now call this function display with more than one value. Okay, so you can see it maintains a tuple of all the remaining values. After the mandatory argument, whatever we passed, that is maintained as a tuple, and after that we are using for loop to access each and every value in that tuple. Okay, so in this way we can make use of variable number of arguments. Okay, now anonymous function. Anonymous function is just like macros used in C programming language, where while using function we also discussed about macros. So hash defines something and that is replaced by something else. So Python also allows us, so we make use of a keyword here, lambda, in order to define the anonymous function. These functions are seems like function, but actually they are not function. They are simply expressions which are being calculated based on certain parameters that we pass. So one-liner statement, they will always return only one value as a result of the expression that we mentioned. So what is the syntax here? Lambda is a keyword. There could be n number of parameters that could be passed, and we have to perform some manipulation on those parameters that we need to mention as an expression. So in that expression, it could be any algebraic, mathematical, logical expression and giving only one result. So that result would be returned after manipulating these parameters. So whatever number of parameters we are mentioning, we need to use those many parameters while calling this anonymous function. Okay, so this statement could be assigned to a name, and that name further can be used to call this anonymous function. For example, if I implement here, suppose I am giving a lambda function or anonymous function name sum. So sum is equal to, I need to use a keyword lambda, and then how many parameters? Let's say 3 parameters. So 3 parameters this lambda will accept, and what we have to do on those parameters, we need to add those parameters x plus y plus z. So whatever x, y and z value is passed, that would be added up and returned by this anonymous function. So how to call this anonymous function? We need to use this name sum on some values, let's say 3, 4, 5. So calling is just similar to function, but it is being used as anonymously, just similar to function, but actually it is replacing with an expression. So this expression is being computed and that is being returned by this anonymous function sum. Okay, after anonymous function, this is one more example. Like there I have used 3 arguments here, only 2 arguments are being used here. So any function we can define anonymously using lambda keyword. Now scope rules of function. So whenever we talk of function, we need to discuss about scope rules, where the particular variable are accessible and where they are not accessible, how those values are updated. In order to understand that, we need to understand scope rules. So basically our focus would be on local and global variable and their updation. So whenever we define a function, we use certain variables. Some variables are being defined inside the function only, so those variables are called local to that function, and these variables cannot be accessed outside the function. Okay, for example, if I talk of def, let me take another example on interpreter only. For example, I am going to define a function add. So in that add, I have to pass only one variable, and next variable would be given from would be defined inside the function only. So b is equal to 9. Okay, and then return a plus b. Okay, now if I call this function add with only one value, and next other value has to be taken from the local variable, so it is giving 17. So this b is equal to 9 is a local variable to this particular function add, and only one value which is passed here. Along with this 9, it is giving returning result as 17. Fine. But at this point of time, if I try to access b, it is giving error because b is local to this function. We cannot access this. So anything outside this function, any variable defined outside this function could be accessible. B is equal to 9. Whenever we are writing, that means we are defining this function. Okay, this is definition. So whenever in Python specifically we are assigning a value to a variable, actually we are defining that variable. So where the definition is given, according to that this access is defined, whether it is local or global. Global could be outside any function, okay, and local inside any function. So this assignment, the first assignment, wherever it is being done, there that particular variable is being defined. This example, define f function in which we have only one variable, so it is not, actually it is definition of a local variable. Local variable is defined here, and that local variable is only printed here. So a, what is this a? This a is different from this particular a. This a is 10, this a is 91. So this is global and this is local. So if you print a, in this case 10 is printed, not 91. If we call f, so this f function will access the value of a, but this value of a would be from this local scope, that is 91. Again print a, it will access the global value. Okay. Now global variable, in previous example we defined a local variable, but in this case we are only using print a. And this, because a is not defined inside this function, it is defined outside the function, so it will take the global value of a and will print that value only. So whenever we call this function f, it will print the value available globally. Now if I am trying to make change, again, although it is being changed but with the same value, so if I print a, it will print this last updated value of a. If we call this function f, it will also access the last updated value of a. Again print a, last updated value of a. Now what's happening, let me take another example. In this example, global keyword sometimes is required. Suppose in this function def f, this def f is defining a function and it is giving global a. That means a is defined globally. So if you want to update a global variable, if you are accessing, there is no problem. But if you try to update a global variable inside the function, in that case, we need to mention this keyword global. We have to, because this is not defined. Here is, it tries to access a variable and that variable is not, you can say it is trying to define. So that is already defined and it's not local. So we need to either first initialize that variable inside this function to make it local, or if we try to update the global variable, in that case it is mandatory to provide this global keyword before this variable name, so that the Python could interpret correctly that on what value we have to make changes. So global a is required here to indicate to this function that a is globally defined, and on that particular value we have to again increase. So this a is increasing from 11 to 12. Now if you call this function f, this will be here, it will take value of 11, change it to 12 and this print. So this will give 12 as an output. Here again if we are changing a is equal to 10, so from 12 it is being updated to 10. Okay. So we will call function f, from 10 it will become 11 and will give output. Print a only, so last value of a is 11, so it will be output. F, again function call, from last updated value it will increase 1 and then will display here. Whatever last updated value would be displayed here. Now if we are changing a11, it is being updated globally. So if we call this function f, from 11 it will make it to 12 and will print this. So global keyword is required whenever we are trying to update a global variable. Otherwise, consider it as a local variable and define inside the function only. I hope you understood. We'll continue this session in next part of this function concept. Till then, thank you.